You know, if anybody had told you a year ago that you would have been ... well, I just didn't think I was going to see this.
Legendary actor and director Robert Redford has passed away. He was 89 years old.
I don't want to be sitting in a rocking chair somewhere and go, oh, I should have, I could have.
Hollywood just lost one of its last true lions. Robert Redford, the man who reshaped American cinema and left fans breathless for decades, has died at the age of 89. But his passing is not just the end of a legendary career, it is the beginning of a storm of unanswered questions. Behind the peaceful farewell at his Sundance home are whispers of fortune battles, haunting tragedies, and hidden conflicts with some of Hollywood's most powerful names. Redford's legacy is not just the films he left behind, it is the secrets, scandals, and heartbreak that defined the man the world thought it knew. On September 16, 2025, the world woke up to news that felt almost unreal. Robert Redford, one of Hollywood's most enduring icons, had passed away in his sleep at his beloved Sundance home in Utah. He was 89 years old. The announcement was brief, issued by his family's representative Cindy Berger, who asked for privacy as the Redford family absorbed the loss. There was no long statement, no elaborate tribute from the family, only a confirmation that he left peacefully in the mountains he had cherished for decades. It was a goodbye wrapped in silence, one that mirrored the private life Redford had so carefully guarded, even at the peak of his fame. But while his family remained discreet, it was his wife Sybil Sagers who broke that silence in a way that cut through the grief. She revealed fragments of his final moments, painting a picture of Redford not just as a screen legend, but as a husband confronting mortality with quiet honesty. In her emotional words, Sybil shared that their final evenings together were filled with unusual stillness. She recalled how Robert would hold her hand for long stretches, sometimes without speaking, before finally confessing, "I just want you to know that I have found peace with you." For her, it seemed like another moment of tenderness in their decades-long relationship. But now, looking back, she admitted it was his way of saying farewell. He even spoke about his sons, Scott and James, both of whom had died years earlier, whispering that he missed them and longed to see them again. These were not just words of grief, but confessions from a man who had spent his life balancing stardom and private pain. That small glimpse into his final days instantly became one of the most heartbreaking elements of the story, because Redford had rarely, if ever, allowed the public to witness such vulnerability. As the official news spread, Hollywood responded in waves. Jane Fonda, his co-star in Barefoot in the Park and The Electric Horseman, admitted she could not stop crying when she heard the news, calling him a beautiful person in every way. Meryl Streep, another giant of the screen, simply said, "One of the lions has passed," a statement that captured what many were feeling, the sense that an entire era of cinema had closed with him. These tributes were not just words of mourning, but recognition of a man who had embodied both the rebellious charm of the golden age of film and the quiet authority of a modern elder statesman. Within hours, the story dominated headlines around the world, from CNN and the New York Times to entertainment outlets and international press. But even in the middle of all the tributes, there was something unusual about how the family chose to handle his passing. There were no immediate details about a funeral, no announcement of a public memorial, and no sweeping retrospective prepared by the Redford estate. For someone whose face was once one of the most recognizable in the world, the silence was almost shocking. It reflected exactly who Robert Redford had always been, a man determined to control his own narrative, even in death. Still, the quietness did little to stop public curiosity. Almost instantly, questions began to swirl. What would happen to his vast fortune? Would Sundance host a memorial to honor its founder? And perhaps most intriguingly, what truths about his life would finally surface now that the man himself was no longer here to shield them? For fans, colleagues, and critics alike, Redford's passing marked not just the end of a life, but the beginning of a search for answers that could reshape how history remembers him. For most actors, the story ends with the films they leave behind, but Robert Redford was never just another movie star. While audiences will forever remember him as the charming outlaw in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, or the sharp con man in The Sting, Redford carved out a second identity that made him stand apart from nearly every other Hollywood figure of his generation.
As I got older and I went into acting, I was drawn to the idea of outlaw characters.
In 1981, when many of his peers were settling into comfortable careers or fading from the spotlight, Redford took a gamble that seemed almost reckless at the time. He founded the Sundance Institute. Tucked away in the quiet mountains of Utah, the project began as a workshop to help young filmmakers develop their voices without the pressures of Hollywood studios. Few could have predicted that it would grow into the most influential launchpad for independent cinema in the world. From Quentin Tarantino to Steven Soderbergh to Damien Chazelle, entire generations of filmmakers credited Sundance for giving them their first real break. Redford's vision created a platform where outsiders, risk-takers, and experimental storytellers could reach audiences who craved something beyond formulaic blockbusters. The annual Sundance Film Festival became not just an industry event, but a cultural phenomenon that reshaped the kind of movies that could reach mainstream audiences. Redford himself often described the festival as a way to keep film honest, a place where creativity mattered more than money, even if he knew the balance was difficult to maintain. For decades, his name became synonymous, not just with glamorous stardom, but with the beating heart of indie cinema. Yet Redford's legacy was not only tied to Sundance. As a director, he proved himself just as formidable behind the camera as he had been in front of it. His 1980 directorial debut, Ordinary People, stunned Hollywood, winning 4 Academy Awards, including Best Director for Redford himself. The film's raw portrayal of family tragedy struck audiences as deeply personal, and critics could not help but connect it to the grief he carried from losing his first son, Scott. He later directed films like Quiz Show, which examined corruption and media manipulation, cementing his reputation as a filmmaker who cared about substance, not just spectacle. What made Redford's influence so unique was that it lived on 2 completely different stages. On one hand, he was the golden boy of 1970s Hollywood, the face that sold millions of tickets and turned simple roles into timeless icons. On the other, he was the quiet visionary who spent decades pouring energy and money into a movement that lifted unknown filmmakers into the spotlight. In both roles, Redford commanded respect because he never lost sight of why storytelling mattered. He was not chasing fame anymore. He was building a bridge for the future of cinema. But this dual legacy also came with tension. Some critics accused Redford of being too controlling at Sundance, or of turning the festival into a brand that sometimes mirrored the Hollywood system he claimed to resist. Others argued that his political outspokenness and refusal to play the typical Hollywood game made him enemies among studio executives and fellow actors. Even so, no one could deny that by the time of his passing, Robert Redford had left behind not just a stack of classic films, but a global institution that forever changed how movies are made, seen, and remembered. And while the world celebrated that legacy, another question was already surfacing. Just how much of his fortune, influence, and power would survive now that he was gone? The moment Robert Redford's death was confirmed, tributes poured in from around the world. But so did questions about what he had left behind. Redford was not just an actor or director. He was a brand, an institution, and a man whose financial footprint stretched far beyond Hollywood. Estimates placed his fortune around $200 million, though some reports suggested it could be even higher when factoring in property, art, film rights, and business ventures. Almost overnight, the debate shifted from grief to speculation, with fans, analysts, and even former industry insiders asking who would inherit the empire Robert Redford built. At the center of it all stood his widow Sybil Sagers and his 2 surviving daughters, Shauna and Amy. Utah law made it clear that, unless stated otherwise in a will, they were the rightful heirs. But nothing about Robert Redford's life was ever simple, and the lack of immediate public information about his will only fueled whispers. Rumors circulated online that Redford had set aside large portions of his estate for the Sundance Institute and the Redford Center, the nonprofit he founded with his late son James. Others speculated that his art collection, an extraordinary assortment of Native American and contemporary works, might end up in museums rather than in private hands. While none of this has been confirmed, the uncertainty created an atmosphere of intrigue, the kind of mystery that inevitably follows a figure of Redford's stature. His tangible assets alone made headlines. His beloved Sundance property, estimated between $10 and $20 million, was not just real estate. It was the beating heart of his identity. The mountains, the land and the creative legacy tied to that place meant more than money. They represented his philosophy of art and independence. He also owned homes in California, Santa Fe, and previously in New York, adding another $20 to $40 million to his portfolio. Then there were his film rights, which continued to generate income through licensing and distribution. In the age of streaming, titles like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and All the President's Men carried immense long-term value. Even the Sundance catalog, which he sold years earlier, had originally brought in tens of millions. Observers pointed out that Redford had been deliberate in shaping his legacy, suggesting he may have left specific instructions to prevent his fortune from turning into a source of conflict. Still, speculation about inheritance disputes lingered. Anonymous insiders claimed that differences might arise between personal heirs and charitable foundations, especially given Redford's long-standing commitment to environmental causes and independent film. Whether these claims hold any truth remains to be seen, but the buzz underscored the reality that Redford's name was tied not just to art, but to significant financial power. The bigger question was not just who would get the money, but what those choices would say about Robert Redford as a man. Was his final wish to secure his family above all else? Or did he want his wealth to continue fueling the artistic and environmental movements he had championed for decades? The silence from his estate made it impossible to know for sure, and that silence only deepened the fascination. Because for someone who had carefully balanced his public image with his private world, Robert Redford's greatest secret might not have been the roles he played, or the films he directed, but the decisions he made about what would endure once he was gone. For decades, Robert Redford kept his private life sealed behind closed doors, rarely giving the press more than carefully measured glimpses. He had been linked to high-profile romances and endured a public divorce, but it was not until much later in life that he found what many would call his true soulmate. In 1996, at his Sundance Mountain Resort in Utah, Redford met Sibylle Sagers, a German-born multimedia artist who had already built a reputation in Europe for her vibrant, nature-inspired work. What began as a quiet friendship in an artistic setting soon grew into something deeper. For a man who had spent his entire career under the blinding glare of Hollywood, Redford seemed to find in Sibylle a kind of refuge, someone who lived in creativity but far outside the machinery of fame. Their relationship lasted more than a decade before they finally married in 2009, in a private ceremony in Hamburg, Germany. Redford was 72, Sibylle was 51, and the event reflected their personalities perfectly. Simple, understated, and intimate, with only a small circle of guests. For some, it was surprising to see the eternal leading man marry so late in life, but for Redford, the timing could not have been better. He was no longer chasing the Hollywood machine. Instead, he had reached a place where he could focus on what mattered most: authentic connection and a shared purpose. In interviews, he admitted that with Sibylle, he felt not only love, but trust, a rare gift for someone who had been in the spotlight for nearly half a century. Together, they created a bond that went far beyond traditional marriage. Sibylle was not just the woman by his side at premieres or charity events. She was a creative force in her own right. In 2015, she launched The Way of the Rain, an ambitious multimedia art project designed to raise awareness about climate change. Redford was not a passive observer. He narrated events, lent his name, and gave his presence to support the work. Audiences who attended these performances often remarked that their partnership was visible on stage, that there was something deeply moving about watching two artists in love channel their energy toward protecting the planet. Unlike many Hollywood marriages where one career overshadows the other, theirs was a union of equals. For Redford, Sibylle's presence represented stability and peace after years marked by personal tragedy. She stood by him through the loss of his son James in 2020, a heartbreak that might have crushed him had he faced it alone. Friends said it was Sibylle who gave him the strength to continue public appearances afterward, ensuring that his environmental work and Sundance commitments did not fade. She was also the one who kept his private world shielded from unwanted media attention, ensuring that even as speculation about his fortune and legacy began to swirl, his home life remained untouched. To the public, she became the voice of his final chapter, the one who revealed his last words and carried his memory to the world. In many ways, the love story between Robert Redford and Sibylle Sagers was his quiet rebellion against the chaos of Hollywood. He had been pursued by the media for most of his life, but with her, he chose simplicity. He had built empires in film and business, but with her, he chose intimacy. In the end, when the world reflected on his fortune, his films, and his fame, those closest to him knew that his greatest legacy was not money or even cinema. It was the serenity of a marriage that gave him peace in his final years. And that bond, as powerful as it was personal, became the anchor of his farewell. Behind Robert Redford's calm smile and timeless screen presence was a man carrying wounds that never truly healed. Long before he became a household name, Redford faced the kind of heartbreak that would mark him for life. In 1959, just 2 months after the birth of his first son, Scott, tragedy struck. The baby died suddenly from what doctors described as sudden infant death syndrome, an event so unexpected and cruel that Redford later admitted it pushed him into depression. He was only in his early 20s, struggling to launch his career, and suddenly burdened with a grief too heavy to put into words. For decades, he spoke little about it, but those close to him said the loss shaped his outlook on life, leaving him more guarded, more cautious about exposing his private world to the spotlight. That heartbreak deepened years later with his second son, James. Born in 1962, James grew into a respected documentary filmmaker and environmental activist, carving out a path that echoed his father's commitment to meaningful storytelling. But James carried with him a lifelong battle against illness. He underwent his first liver transplant in 1993 after a rare bile duct condition, a medical fight that became a recurring shadow over his life. Despite his health struggles, James worked tirelessly, co-founding the Redford Center with his father to merge activism with film. Together, they produced documentaries that tackled climate change and social justice, proving that filmmaking could be more than entertainment. It could be a tool for change. By 2020, James faced another health crisis. After undergoing a second liver transplant, he was diagnosed with bile duct cancer. On October 16, 2020, he passed away at just 58 years old. For Redford, it was a devastating blow. In a short public statement, he admitted, "The grief is immeasurable with the loss of a child." Those words, brief but raw, revealed the pain he had carried privately for so long. Friends later said James's death marked one of the rare moments when the world saw past the polished Hollywood image and glimpsed the human being underneath. The father who had now buried not one, but 2 sons. That pain found its way into his art. Critics often pointed to Redford's 1980 directorial debut, Ordinary People, which told the story of a family shattered by the death of a child. The film won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Director for Redford, but many saw it as more than just a movie. It was a reflection of his own grief. While Redford never publicly linked the film to his personal life, the emotional depth of its storytelling suggested otherwise. He had transformed private tragedy into art that resonated with audiences around the world, proving once again that his career was inseparable from the life he lived. Even with such heartbreak, Redford rarely allowed his grief to become public spectacle. His daughters, Shauna and Amy, also maintained the family's tradition of privacy. Shauna chose to live almost entirely out of the spotlight, while Amy pursued a career in film but spoke only sparingly about her father's influence. Their silence reflected the same quiet dignity Robert himself had shown throughout his career, an unspoken agreement to protect what remained of their family from the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Yet those tragedies never left him. They lingered quietly in interviews, in the way he avoided certain subjects, and in the rare confessions he shared with Sibyl during his final days. To the world, Redford was a symbol of resilience and success, but in private, he was a man shaped as much by his losses as by his triumphs. And it was this duality, the legend admired by millions and the father scarred by grief, that gave his story a haunting depth no Hollywood script could ever capture. When people talk about the golden era of American cinema, Robert Redford's name is almost impossible to leave out. He was not just another leading man. He embodied a new kind of stardom in the 1970s, a mix of charm, grit, and quiet intensity that drew audiences in. His breakout came with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969, opposite Paul Newman. The film not only turned him into a household name, but gave him a nickname, Sundance, that would follow him for life. Soon after came The Sting in 1973, which won the Oscar for Best Picture and cemented him as one of the most bankable actors in Hollywood. For years, Redford seemed unstoppable, headlining hits like The Great Gatsby, The Way We Were, and All the President's Men, each role reinforcing his image as both a heartthrob and a serious actor capable of tackling complex political or emotional stories. But Redford was more than a star. He was a visionary. His decision to step behind the camera proved he had instincts few actors possessed. With Ordinary People in 1980, his directorial debut, he stunned Hollywood by winning the Academy Award for Best Director. Later projects like Quiz Show in 1994 confirmed that he was not just chasing commercial success, he wanted to tell stories that mattered. This dual-career actor and director set him apart from many of his peers, elevating him into the rare category of artists who could dominate in both worlds. Still, no career at that level comes without friction. Despite his on-screen chemistry with Paul Newman, rumors swirled for years about quiet competition between the two. Some insiders claimed Redford always felt overshadowed by Newman's charisma, while others suggested Newman grew weary of Redford's determination to control creative directions. The supposed tension never exploded publicly, but whispers of rivalry became part of Hollywood folklore. He was also rumored to have clashed with Warren Beatty, another star-director hybrid, known for his oversized ego. Reports claimed the two competed for roles and influence, with Redford resenting Beatty's reputation as a playboy, and Beatty dismissing Redford as too perfect to be relatable. Whether true or not, these stories painted a picture of a man who was not universally adored behind the scenes, no matter how beloved he was by audiences. Redford also faced criticism from some corners of Hollywood for his outspoken political views. He was a vocal environmentalist and often criticized U.S. administrations, particularly Republican presidents, for their environmental policies. While many admired his activism, others accused him of using his fame as a platform to push personal agendas. Studio executives reportedly found him difficult to manage, not because he was scandalous, but because he insisted on having a say in projects, scripts, and creative choices. For Redford, filmmaking was never just about entertainment. It was about shaping the culture, and that kind of conviction often clashed with Hollywood's profit-driven system. Yet even with controversies, Redford's influence only grew. By the time he starred in The Natural in 1984, he had become the quintessential American hero on screen. A man audiences trusted to carry both romance and drama with ease. His films reflected not just characters but eras, tapping into the mood of America in the 1970s and 1980s. When he was not starring in them, he was producing or directing stories that held up a mirror to society. And while Hollywood insiders whispered about rivalries and grudges, the public saw only the legend, the golden-haired actor who seemed untouched by scandal, who aged gracefully, and who balanced stardom with authenticity. What made Redford so unique was that he did not burn out or fade away like many of his contemporaries. He reinvented himself again and again, whether through Sundance, directing, or political activism. His career was less about chasing the next blockbuster and more about shaping the kind of cinema he believed in. And even though not everyone agreed with his methods or his politics, by the time of his passing, Robert Redford had secured a place in history, not just as a movie star, but as an artist who changed the very industry he dominated. And so, as the world reflects on his passing, the lasting question is not about his wealth, his films, or even his activism. It is about how history will define him. As the golden-haired leading man of the 1970s, the visionary founder of Sundance, the grieving father who turned pain into art, or the quiet husband who found peace in love. The truth is, he was all of these at once. Robert Redford's death may have closed a chapter in Hollywood history, but the story of his life, layered, complicated, and unforgettable, will continue to spark debate, admiration, and inspiration for generations to come. What aspect of Robert Redford's legacy resonates most with you? Was it his iconic film roles, his vision for independent cinema through Sundance, or his quiet strength through personal tragedy? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this tribute meaningful, consider subscribing for more stories about Hollywood's most fascinating figures.